The marble floors gleamed like still water, each reflection warped by motion. Lang Chen moved in measured circles, mop in hand, his back curved slightly from years of labor. It was 6:42 a.m. on the 47th floor when silence reigned in the empire. Slept. He liked this time best. The world was cleaner when it hadn't yet opened its mouth. Liang worked quietly, always quietly. In 3 years at Kelsen Dynamics, no one had asked him where he was from. Not really. They only assumed. "Hey, Lear Lang or whatever, can you grab that spill near the glass?" One intern had muttered last week without looking up from his phone. Lang had nodded. No correction, no reaction. It was easier that way. They thought he didn't speak English. They were wrong. He spoke 5 languages fluently. English with subtle precision, Mandarin like a river. Once taught computational linguistics at Tsinghua University before fleeing political persecution. Before his wife disappeared. Before New York became the only place he could hide and still breathe. Now he cleaned. He wasn't ashamed of the work. He was ashamed of how small the world made him feel for doing it. As elevators pinged and heels clicked past, no one made eye contact. They never did. To them, he was just background, a moving part of the architecture, not a person. In the break room, he sat alone, always listening. God. "I hope that new Chinese guy doesn't butcher the investor pitch," an executive chuckled, sipping her overpriced coffee. Another chimed in. "Just smile and nod." "That's what they do, right?" They laughed. Liang stirred his tea without looking up. He didn't speak not because he couldn't, but because he knew exactly what his words were worth in their ears. Nothing. The cleaning cart's wheels creaked as he pushed it past the glass conference room. Inside, men in tailored suits pointed at screens filled with Chinese characters none of them could read. They were rehearsing for a deal he knew more about than they ever would. Still, he walked on. As he reached the lobby, sunlight poured in through the glass walls. Paused. For a moment, he saw his reflection cleaning gear uniform creased. Eyes dull, but behind them something stirred. Stillness. Power. A mind waiting. Then the elevator dinged again. Executives poured out. A voice barked down the hallway. "The translator just canceled. What the hell are we supposed to do now?" Liang kept moving, but his fingers curled slightly around the mop handle. Something was shifting, and soon someone would speak. The building pulsed with urgency. At 9:03 a.m., company-wide alert chimed across all floors of Kelsen Dynamics HQ. Priority, global. Live stream meeting at 10 o'clock, all executives to conference level. Liang read the message as it flashed across the security screen at the janitor's closet. He folded the cleaning rag precisely, slid it into his cart, and headed toward the 48th floor. There was tension in the air, now tight, urgent, loud. Executives marched in sleek lines, barking into phones. The receptionist's smile was gone, replaced with rapid Mandarin on a headset. She looked panicked. Liang noted her dialect, Southern, possibly Fujianese. A childhood memory stirred. On the top floor, Richard Kelsen stood at the center of chaos. A billionaire in his 50s, Kelsen had the ease of someone accustomed to power. But today, his confidence was unraveling. "Where the hell is the translator?" he shouted, slamming his palm onto the table. "We go live in," he checked his Rolex, 56 minutes, "and I've got $500 million tied up in this deal." "No," an assistant whispered in his ear. Richard's face hardened. "Visa issues? Are you kidding me?" "What are we?" A silence fell as he scanned the room. "Does anyone here speak Mandarin?" No one answered. Phones buzzed and turns scrambled. Someone called the Chinese embassy. Another downloaded an app that butchered pronunciation. Liang was in the far corner, wiping a glass wall. His motions slowed. He had seen this before, men in suits chasing control as it slipped through their fingers from behind the projector. "Screen," a voice muttered, "figures. Useless translators. You'd think we could find one in this city." Someone else laughed. "Don't look at me. I can barely pronounce General Tso's chicken." More laughter. Liang turned, cloth in hand, face unreadable. They didn't see him, or if they did, they saw only what they chose. Richard stormed to the center. "I'm not canceling this. We look weak. We need a solution now." He pointed randomly. Toward a group of assistants. You? Anyone. We're about to lose a generational deal because no one speaks their damn language. No one moved. Then a younger voice half-joked, Hey, maybe the floor guy can help. Since he's probably from there. Laughter again. Liang's grip tightened slightly. He didn't look up. Richard's voice cut through it all. I don't care who it is. I need a body in front of that screen who can translate full technical and legal Mandarin, or I walk, and the deal dies. The clock ticked. Liang stared at his reflection in the polished glass, saw them behind him, rushing, shouting, unraveling. Then slowly, placed the cloth back on the cart. He turned, and with perfect clarity, he said, I can. Gasps filled the room. Richard stared, and for the first time, everyone looked at Liang Chen, not through him. At him, what they saw they weren't ready for. I can. The words fell with unnatural weight, slicing through the air like glass cracking. Richard. Kelson turned first, brows furrowed. The others followed, assistants, VPs and turns, all eyes locking onto the janitor with the navy uniform in calloused hands. The silence stretched. You? Richard said flat. You speak Mandarin? Liang nodded once, slow and unflinching, fluently. A scoff rose from someone near the window. Another muttered under his breath, This ought to be good. All right, janitor, Richard snapped. Let's test this. Sophie, get the term sheet. Sophie, a nervous intern, handed over the printed packet. Richard flipped through it, pulled a dense paragraph of legal language, and shoved it at Liang. Translate it. Out loud, Liang took the page with steady hands. His eyes scanned the text briefly, then he looked up. And in clear tonal Mandarin, he began. The rhythm was effortless, the syntax precise, no hesitation, no stumbles. His voice rang out melodic, but firm, every syllable crisp. When he paused, it was only to let the English phrasing echo behind it. People stopped moving. Even the executives, still half distracted by their devices, looked up. Richard blinked. Now the next section, he said, voice lower. Liang continued. His fluency was total, not just linguistic, but cultural. He didn't just read, interpreted, conveying nuance, subtext, legal intent, even corrected a subtle contractual error, noting it. This clause could be perceived as a sovereignty infringement by mainland standards. Jesus, someone whispered. Richard cleared his throat, suddenly uneasy. Where'd you learn to speak like that? Liang met his eyes. Taught at Tsinghua University, Department of Computational Linguistics. Before that, Fudan, you're a professor? Sophie asked quietly. I was. A pause. What happened? She asked. Liang hesitated, but only briefly. I criticized a policy. My wife and I were detained. She disappeared. I left the country 6 months later, seeking asylum. The room shifted. What was once mockery twisted into discomfort. He handed the document back. His hands trembled slightly now, but not from fear. From release, no one spoke for a moment. Then Richard turned to his assistant. Get the Chinese firm's rep on the line. He's our translator now. Liang's eyes narrowed. Will I be compensated accordingly? He asked. The room stilled again. Richard smirked. You're a janitor? Let's not get ahead of then. Get someone else. Liang interrupted. Quiet but unwavering. More silence. Real, this time. It's a kind that means someone had spoken out. Of Turnan still stood. A flicker of something crossed Richard's face. Not quite respect. Not yet, but something close. Fine, he muttered. We'll talk about it after. Liang nodded. Very well. As he stepped into the glass-walled conference room, Mop abandoned behind him. His reflection stared back, same uniform, same eyes, but something had changed. He wasn't background anymore. Outside, the team scrambled to prepare for the meeting. Inside, Liang reviewed the materials with calm efficiency. But deep inside, something else stirred. Memories, Shanghai, 2016. Riot police outside his classroom. The letter he signed with 12 other academics. The screams. The silence afterward. His wife's last words, "Don't stay silent, even if they only hear you once." A chime sounded. The live stream countdown began. Lang adjusted the headset. Around him eyes watched, but no longer with indifference. They were listening, and for the first time in years, he would be heard. The virtual boardroom flickered to life on the oversized screen. On one side, Richard Kelson sat stiff in his seat, arms folded tightly, sweat collecting just beneath the fine linen collar of his Italian shirt. Across from him thousands of miles. Away in Beijing, CEO Jian Su of Shuling Technologies appeared in perfect clarity, composed and stone-faced. His team flanked him, waiting at the center, seated slightly behind the main desk. Was Liang Chunhead set on, eyes focused. Every word passing through him like current through wire. The meeting began. Richard spoke in clipped English, trying to sound confident. "Let me begin by expressing our excitement for this opportunity." Lang translated seamlessly, his voice steady, respectful. On the other end, Su nodded. Proceeded, but 20 minutes in, Su interrupted. His Mandarin was crisp, direct. "Who is this man translating for you?" Liang translated the question aloud, though his hands tensed slightly. Richard glanced at him, then turned to face the screen. "Oh, just a trusted internal resource," he said vaguely. Su raised an eyebrow. "He is not on your executive roster. He speaks like a professor, not a staff interpreter." Richard forced a smile. "He's part of our multilingual compliance initiative." Su leaned forward. "I will not proceed unless you tell me his name and role. We must know who we're doing business with." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Liang removed his headset slowly, setting it on the polished table. He did not look at Richard. Richard leaned toward him, dropping his voice to a whisper only the mic couldn't catch. "Just do this. I'll compensate you generously after." Liang turned his head. His voice was just as quiet. "You already have. You just don't know it." Richard blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lang stood and faced the screen. "I am Lang Chen," he said in Mandarin. "Former professor of linguistics at Tsinghua. Political refugee. And currently a janitor in this building." The air froze. Su tilted his head. Then slowly he smiled. "Your credentials are impressive. Gain your honester where. We are honored." He turned back to Richard. "We will continue, but only with him as the named intermediary." Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine." The rest of the meeting proceeded with new balance. Liang, now visible and acknowledged, held the space like a conductor. Every question, every clarification. He translated without hesitation, but inside he felt hollow. They listened to him now, yes, but only because they had to, because they needed him. Not because they saw him. As the call ended and screens dimmed, Richard turned to Liang. "You're going to be a hard man to forget." Liang met his eyes, expression unreadable. "That's the idea." He gathered his notes without a word and left the room, passing sleek glass, confused interns, and eyes now heavy with awareness. Downstairs, the janitorial floor was quiet again, but this time, he didn't disappear into it because somewhere inside, something had shifted. Not just in the room, in him. The next morning, a flurry of congratulatory emails zipped through the corridors of Kelson Dynamics. Subject lines gleamed. Masterstroke execution. Flawless coordination. Thank you, Richard, for leading with vision. In every message, Lang Chen's name was absent. Richard Kelson smiled behind tinted office glass, flanked by board members singing his praises. His inbox overflowed. News broke on Bloomberg. Kelson seals landmark China tech deal. It happened. Liang, meanwhile, returned to the 42nd floor utility closet, back in uniform. Back in silence, at 11:17 a.m., HR summoned him. The interview room was cold and white. A woman named Gina sat across from him, hands folded neatly on a file. "Mr. Chen," she began, glancing at the pages. "Your employee record lists no advanced degrees. You applied with minimal documentation." "Clean floors," Liang replied. "I wasn't applying for tenure." She didn't smile, Do you understand why that's concerning? Yes, you expected me to be invisible. Now that I'm not, it's a threat. Gina shifted uncomfortably. We're just trying to verify credentials. You understand that in light of your performance yesterday, there are risks. Risks, he repeated. Because I speak more languages than your entire board? She closed the file. This isn't adversarial, Mr. Chen. He stood. It always is. To smile while doing it, he left before she could respond. Later that day, in a quiet elevator descending to sublevel 3, Liang heard a voice beside him. Hell of a performance. He turned to see Amara Lewis, director of Global Risk. Black, mid-40s, sharp eyes, and a spine of steel. She extended her hand. I've worked here 9 years, she said. 3 promotions later, they still introduce me like I'm someone's intern? Liang blinked. Why tell me this? Because I've seen what they do to people who don't fit. They'll applaud you in the dark and erase you in daylight. They exited onto the loading dock. Alone now. I was top of my class at Princeton, Amara said. In 2 years, they let a man who couldn't find Lagos on a map override my calls on African markets. Liang exhaled. They pretend not to hear you until they need your voice. She nodded. And once they use it, they'll try to shelve it, unless you speak louder. They sat on a low concrete ledge. The hum of HVAC units buzzed in the background. What do you want, Liang? She asked softly. He hesitated. For the first time, he truly considered the question. I want to be more than a utility. I want to be seen without needing a disaster to justify my presence. Amara smiled. Oh. Then let's make sure they can't forget you. That night, Liang opened an old email account he hadn't touched in years. In the drafts folder sat a half-written article titled The Disappearance of Truth, Exile and Language. He stared at it, then began to type. Not for Richard, not for Kelson Dynamics, for himself, for the thousands who would never be offered a seat at the table, and less, and flipped. It began with a whisper on an industry blog. An anonymous post. Kelson's secret weapon? The janitor who sealed the China deal? Most ignored it. But one young journalist didn't. Maya Noosu. A Nigerian-American freelancer hustling in the cracks of Manhattan journalism dug deeper. She'd interned at Kelson Dynamics once. She knew how they airbrushed the truth within 2 days. She found him. Liang was wiping down an elevator panel when she approached gently, respectfully. I don't want to intrude, she said, but I think people deserve to know who you are. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, nodded. They met at a Chinatown cafe 2 nights later. Maya recorded every word as Liang unraveled his story. How he fled Beijing. How his wife vanished after state detention. How he cleaned floors with a degree that meant nothing here. How he endured jokes, slights, and silence from people who never looked him in the eye. And how, when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. Maya's article dropped 3 days later. From exile to interpreter, the man who wasn't supposed to speak. It spread like wildfire. Hashtags erupted. Hashtag yearly young. Hashtag not your janitor. Hashtag brains. In the basement, community groups amplified his story. Asian American activists, refugee advocacy groups. A Brooklyn high school printed his face on their wall with the, quote, "It's not just about speaking the language. It's about being heard." And with every share, every voice, the pressure grew. Richard Kelson tried to control the damage. In a carefully worded statement, he downplayed Liang's role. A valued member of the facilities team stepped in to assist. His contribution was appreciated. But Maya had receipts, recordings, witnesses, a source inside the boardroom. Within hours. A leaked email showed Richard explicitly instructing PR to omit Liang's name from the announcement. The next morning, headlines changed. Tone Kelson CEO under fire for whitewashing hero translator? By noon, the board called an emergency meeting. This time, Liang was there. He walked into the room in a charcoal-gray jacket and dark slacks. Not a uniform. No badge, just presence. The board chair, a polished woman in her 60s named Margot Shaw, looked up, double quotes, "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming." Liang sat without waiting to be invited. Margot gestured to Richard, who stood stiff near the screen. "We've asked Mr. Kelson to clarify the events of last week." Richard cleared his throat. "I acted in the best interest of the company. I didn't want to make it about optics. You made it about silence," Liang interrupted. All eyes turned to him. "I was convenient when you were desperate, and disposable the second the cameras turned off." Margot didn't stop him. No one did. Liang inhaled, slow and full. "You don't get to erase people and then rewrite them as footnotes." He stood. "I don't need your stage. I have my own voice now." A long pause. Then Margot said softly, "We owe you more than thanks. What do you want?" Liang looked out the window, where the city pulsed loud, alive. "I'll let you know," he said, and he walked out. The auditorium filled slowly, a quiet buzz of anticipation humming through the crowd. It wasn't a press event. No cameras flashing, no billionaire in sight. Just people, students, educators, community leaders, janitorial staff in crisp uniforms, and a few familiar faces from the tower, seated near the back. Near the front sat Amara Lewis, hands folded neatly in her lap. Eyes proud, at the podium stood Liang Chen, wearing a dark tailored suit, clean lines and calm strength. A crimson banner above read, "Columbia University Honorary Fellowship in Global Linguistics and Human Dignity." We adjusted the mic with steady fingers. "When I first arrived in this country," it began, "I spoke many languages, but not the one that mattered most. Silence." The room stilled. I believed if I worked hard enough, kept my head down, I would earn a voice again. But in silence, I was not invisible. I was convenient. Murmurs rippled across the hall. He paused, then continued. "They told me I was too. Quiet to matter, too foreign to belong. Too educated to mop floors, and too brown to be trusted at the table." He looked up. "But I learned something. Dignity is not given, it's reclaimed." In the third row, a woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Liang scanned the audience. "To those who clean, deliver, translate, care, and fix this floor was never theirs to begin with. But they made it shine." A beat of silence. I was. Not the hero of that boardroom. I was the mirror. I showed them the value they refused to see. He closed his notes softly. "It's not just about speaking the language," he said, voice low but resonant. "It's about being heard." The crowd rose in quiet applause, no roaring fanfare, no press frenzy. Just real, sustained respect. Later, that evening, Liang returned to the tower. The lobby shimmered beneath the same lights he once wiped clean. But now, security nodded at him with reverence, passed through the glass doors without swiping in. He paused at the edge of the marble. Floor dot once, he scrubbed it quietly at dawn. Now, he walked across it not as a janitor, not as a refugee, but as a man who changed the room without. Raising his voice, he didn't look back. The floor was his now, and the world was finally listening.